That's all that mathematically perfected economy has to do in order to accomplish all of the people's incontrovertible objects. So what is this but a perpetual lie about a new financing approach, as if to give the people some kind of hope that we're not going to suffer the same consequences which we can only suffer under their lie of the Federal Reserve note, which is not truly a note of the Federal Reserve at all, because the Federal Reserve will give up nothing of value in order to issue these notes. So it's not a true creditor. The true creditor is the person that builds the $100,000 house with a 100-year lifespan, who gives up the house for the promissory note of the what I prefer to call the obligor, a person who by nature commits to paying that debt, which the creditor is paid in full, and so which payment only requires that the obligor pay out of circulation at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property. This and this alone perpetually, without even any regulation whatsoever, maintains a 1-to-1-to-1 relationship between remaining circulation, remaining value of related property, and of course the related obligation, which cements the whole thing together and which is necessary merely as a vehicle of monetizing all production, because it is impossible either to pay for the things that we consume properly or to solve inflation and deflation without attaching to every unit of circulation an equal obligation to pay it out of circulation by whoever should be obligated to do so. Simple as that. There's no free lunch. You pay for what you consume, and you do so at the rate at which you consume of it, and you have mathematically perfected economy. There's no avoiding this. These people who have plagiarized my work, who merely accept the thing that I fought for so many years for people to understand, and that is that interest is unjustified and unjustifiable. I'm the original author of this idea, and the proofs that it is unjustifiable. These people who plagiarize me now with purported solution after purported solution of merely spending money into circulation merely do so assuming as if authority, as if they had authored this idea that money can't be subject to interest, which is a crime against us, but that money can be spent into circulation, which they also plagiarized from my work, which idea was introduced by my Parable of Perfect Economy since 1975, which shows how to spend money into circulation, indeed, without even, funding government, indeed, without even taxation. But this is a purpose fault. And because I removed the explanations of it because of all the plagiarists, to trap further plagiarists, these people have gone off, and what do? In defending this, when I point out how it will engender inflation, they say, no, there is a way to do this, and it's taxation. Well, of course, taxation doesn't solve the issues of the private sector, and mathematically perfected economy and mathematically perfected economy alone 43 years ago solved the problems not only of the private sector but the federal government or all public government together in its obligatory schedule of payment. And whoever has a complaint against that? In fact, it's with these preposterous people who advocate that money can't be a debt or it can't be credit, who are wrong. It's what they in the end have to explain. In other words, they have to claim the arguments of mathematically perfected economy in their defense. So in truth, they're not even advocating the truth of spending money into circulation. It's merely an attractive expression which the people who utter it don't even understand. Can't exist and doesn't exist if, in fact, we have true economy, which would avoid people having to pay the cost by inflation. Simple as that. This just goes on and on and on and on. Here we have from LouRockwell.com, I believe. In any case, the LRC blog. Wanted, Austro-monetary economist for Ron Paul. Well, if Ron Paul were a competent Austrian economist, which I assert there's no such thing, why would he rely on someone else to help him? But in any case, this article tells us who is going to come to our rescue here. How, you already have rescue in mathematically perfected economy. But here something else is happening, and what exactly is it? The article says, Ron Paul, it's very brief, Ron Paul has been named chairman of the Domestic Monetary Policy Subcommittee. Why would you name Ron Paul the chairman of that? Particularly if you had any worthy ideas. Are competing banks even going to be allowed under the Federal Reserve System? How long would we fight for that? For naught, to no potential benefit whatsoever. How could it even help us? Has anyone shown? He's advocated higher rates of interest, which can only multiply artificial indebtedness at a faster rate. I've argued this for years. No one can invalidate it. No one can refute it. Yet it's what he's continued to advocate wrongly. Could have saved us from this escalation of artificial indebtedness. Well, in fact, the higher rates of interest he advocates can only multiply artificial indebtedness all the faster. Okay, so why would you make Ron Paul chairman of the Domestic Monetary Policy Committee? So it says he's been named the chairman and will have one committee staffer. Ron and his chief of staff, Jeff Deist, are looking for a smart, young economist, quote, thoroughly Austrian. And why? Austrians advocate higher rates of interest. They advocate interest. The obfuscation of our currency is what is destroying our country. Why would you advocate this? Why would you make this man chairman of a committee which can only advocate this because he's determining, not by the quality of the ideas, not by the fact that there's a proof of any thesis in Austrian economics whatsoever, because there is no proof of any thesis under Austrian economics. Why would you make this man not only chairman of the committee, but allow him to simply direct us a direction which cannot serve us, which has been proven over and over and over again, cannot serve us, and yet here we are. Now, people, Ron Paul supporters take so much exception to this. They refuse to recognize what the own principle, the very principles that they assert. That is, that there has to be a relationship between the circulation and the wealth that it represents. They constantly claim that there's circulatory inflation. Well, in fact, there's very little. And the whole reason that the Fed is introducing so much money into circulation is because we're paying that much out of circulation, which results in negligible change in the volume of circulation. And so while they advocate that an increase in money is what's driving prices up, and they wrongly advocate that, but yet that's what principle they claim to be, the one that we have to adhere to. And yet, can you do this subject to interest? Certainly you can't, because of maladisposition, perpetually multiplying the sum of indebtedness in proportion to the circulation, and dedicated ever more of a circulation to servicing debt instead. So the circulation, which can be dedicated to sustaining commerce, of course, is less and less and less and less, you see, which ought to mean, in fact, that the prices go down. But the fact is that because industry is the engine by which the debt is serviced, industry is compelled to increase its prices just to maintain margins of solubility, but it's denied that opportunity by the same thing, which because ever less of the circulation is available to industry in its markets. So you see, what you have here is a man being named chairman of the Domestic Monetary Policy Committee, subcommittee who will not even respond to my arguments because he doesn't even have a counter argument, much less a plausible one, you see. So this goes on to ask that this person be thoroughly Austrian, young. Why he asked for young, I have no idea. And I've been doing this for 40 years, and it's as if I was still young. People just, it's as if, oh, well, someday somebody has to acknowledge that or it can't be true. Well, mathematicians don't have any problem with it. Why do economists? Well, they don't have any problem that they want to raise. They claim you're a Marxist or a socialist or something like that, while in fact mathematically perfected economy is the only possible vehicle of true free enterprise. On the contrary, you see. And who are these people? They're always Austrian economists, the very thing that Ron Paul is explicitly demanding to have here. The very people who are defeating mathematically perfected economy by false assertions that it's socialist. And they use these words, they don't even understand them, Thoroughly Austrian, he asked for, and preferably with an advanced degree. The candidate needs strong knowledge of the Fed and monetary policy generally. Well, what better example of that than a thorough understanding of the obfuscation of the currency, which Mr. Paul will never answer to, because that's what the Fed is all about, as is every central banking system of the world. So what is the hope of America here if it rests on Ron Paul? You see, the Fed charges interest for money. The Fed launders the principal into its possession. Is Ron Paul advocating anything different in his competing banks? Of course not. Because the only thing that is different is to restore to the people their inherent right to issue their own promissory obligations free of exploitation and to pay them out of circulation at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property, which is mathematically perfected economy. That's the only thing that solves our problem. And Ron Paul is demanding someone with a contrary disposition altogether. He or she will be responsible for organizing hearings, summarizing data and Fed actions for Dr. Paul, writing statements, dealing with financial services committee staff, and various other tasks. Ron and Jeff want an economist with a strong personality to match their strong analytical skills. How could you do all these things and not recognize mathematically perfected economy if you have any analytical skills whatsoever? So this is what the hope of America and the world rests upon, so long as any country of the world pursues such a course. Many people have been asking me recently how mathematically perfected economy might impact current events in Egypt, Libya, and Japan. Before I get into that, I'll take them in order. But before I get into that, quite a few questions have been asked about Islamic banking, so-called. And I think it'd be prudent to discuss the differences. And upon our understanding of that, I think we could better understand what the prospective impact of this proposition of mathematically perfected economy might be, not just for Egypt, Libya, the events which are transpiring there, but events which may soon escalate or expand to a more justifiable nature in every other affected country of the world. Greece, Italy, Spain, Europe, South America, Asia, the Middle East, the world can only benefit tremendously by an immediate transition to mathematically perfected economy.